I'd like to welcome Rory Fanning. Rory is an anti-war activist and the author of Worth Fighting For, an Army Ranger's journey out of the military and across America.
I will just say one of the lines that just popped out at me because of the work I'm doing in this speech is we were taking the black young men who had been crippled by our society and sending them 8,000 miles away to guarantee liberties in Southeast Asia, which they had not found in Southwest Georgia and East Harlem. So not much has changed since that line was said. Here in Chicago is ground zero for military recruitment. We have 10,000 young people signed up for the JROTC program here in Chicago, 50% being black, 45% being Latino. We have 10,000 military recruiters stalking the hallways across the country, trying to convince these young people, disproportionately black and Latino, to fly off to one of our 800 military bases around the world, or participate in any one of the 7 countries that we are currently bombing right now. It is incredibly difficult to get into these schools and talk to these kids about the military and what these recruiters are asking them to do. Recruiters who are working with the $700 million a year advertising budget, to say nothing of the movies and video games that help usher these kids off into the military. And the reason it's difficult is because school administrators here in Chicago Public Schools see the military as a good alternative to the school-to-prison pipeline. Well, it's not an alternative to the school-to-prison pipeline, the school-to-military pipeline. These kids, when you talk to them, they can tell you very little about what has happened over the last 15 years around the world as the results of the US-led global war on terror. They can't tell you about the 1 million or so people that have lost their lives, the great majority of which are innocent civilians. They can hardly tell you about that. But when you ask them about the military, they talk to you about structure and discipline. They talk to you about some of the positive things. So at Veterans for Peace, we try to get into these schools. We don't go in there and wag our fingers and tell them, you can't do this and make them feel guilty about their decisions. But we want to give them a full disclosure. We want to tell these kids that you're not fighting for freedom and democracy around the world when you sign up for the military. It's not necessarily a good thing to do after graduation. I mean, you don't see these military recruiters in the suburban schools. You see these military recruiters coming to the inner city where there are very few options after graduation for these kids. And it's unfair, and it's wrong, and it's a racist system, and we need to fight against it. So all I'd ask is to make space for veterans, for anyone who is willing to come into these schools and talk about the complete military experience. These kids don't know that between 1980 and 2001, there were 531 suicide bombs around the world, with only 10% directed at the U.S. or U.S. interests. Or that between 2001 and the present day, there's been over 2,500 suicide bombs around the world, with over 90% aimed at the U.S. and U.S. interests. The world is a much more dangerous place because of the U.S.-led global war on terror. And it's benefiting a very small percentage of the population. And it needs to end. It needs to end 15 years ago. So all I can say is if you claim to support the troops in a certain way, let the soldiers who want to come in and talk about the realities of war into these schools. Let them speak to the students. Let them get a full disclosure before they go off to sign the dotted line and kill or be killed so a small percentage of the population can be wealthy. So thank you very much.